Hi everyone in English 1301, it's Dr. E. I'm here with your weekly supplemental video, which I hope is really going to be helpful in terms of thinking about the process of revising, editing, and then finally submitting your portfolio. So I'm going to point out things that we need to avoid, but then also just some general revisiting of MLA and going through some of those kinds of confusing things that may happen when we're trying to use MLA because MLA is the worst, right? So the first thing I'm going to do is talk about Stedman's article, so taking us back a little bit, just because Stedman, I think, does a really good job of identifying some of the things that we may do with our writing when it comes to including research, but he also helpfully provides fixes, right? Fixes for all of these kinds of issues. So I'm going to go through that, and then I'll walk through some additional information. Okay, so here's Stedman's article. Right? And so I'm going to scroll down, and what I really want to do is just walk through those annoyances. The whole article is really great. I think he breaks down the ideas very easily, but we really want to, at least in terms of our own writing this week, think about these annoyances, right? So the first annoyance that Stedman gets into is what he identifies as Armadillo Roadkill, which, you know, that's a pretty memorable term, but he notes that this is just dropping in a quote without offering any kind of introduction. This is, I mean, I may say this for all of these issues, this is one of my pet peeves, right? And it's only because as somebody who reads a lot of papers and a lot of student ideas, I get really into it. But when I hit a quote that seems to come out of nowhere and has no explanation, it's really jarring, right? It stops me in my tracks, and it does that likely for all of your audience as well, because I don't know the context. I don't know what's going on. Like, who is this person with this quote, right? So we really want to avoid that when we're thinking about our revisions, okay? So just dropping in that quote is something that can be easily avoided by just offering some sort of explanation, right? So here's the example of the problem, right? So Stedman writes, or he's using student examples, right? We should all be prepared with a backup plan if a zombie invasion occurs. Here's the quote: unlike its human counterparts, an army of zombies is completely independent of support. And then we have the last name, page number, period. And then preparation should be made in the following areas. So that quote just comes out of nowhere. It kind of makes a big, you know, it bumps anybody's attention. That's not to say it's not properly, you know, we have a proper in-text citation, a proper period placement, but we need more in order to include people's ideas, right? And so here's the fix, and it's just about introducing, well, who the heck is this Brooks character? So Max Brooks suggests a number of ways to prepare for, so there's an introduction here, right? We have the quote still, but we have all of this introduction and then explanation. And that's what we want to do, especially, this is really something we need to think about with Choi's work, because Choi cites a lot of people. She quotes Dan Barber and Jennifer 8 Lee and Crystal Moe and a bunch of people. So in our writing, we need to make sure our audience understands this is Choi's article, right? But this is somebody in her article. So offering some sort of background explanation. Like in Choi's article, she references Chef Dan Barber, and he states, right? You don't have to go, you know, you don't have to have a whole paragraph that explains your quote. We just need some sort of introduction. So I always tell students, typically sentences can be around 4 to 5 paragraphs can be around 4 to 5 sentences. But when we start adding research, that gets bumped up to 6 to 7, because we have hopefully some sort of sentence that introduces a quote, then the quote and explanation can end up being 1 sentence, right? Or it can be up to 3 sentences, right? So just start thinking of that kind of formula in your mind. Okay, so he then talks about this idea of dating Spider-Man, right? So starting or ending a paragraph with a quotation, and that just really is very similar to Armadillo Roadkill, right? So we have the ending of this paragraph, and then immediately this author is jumping right into a quote. Again, that is really jarring because there's no explanation, right? There's no introduction to these ideas. Who is this person? Why should we care about this person's quote? We don't want to start paragraphs with somebody else's words. Our paragraphs should all have strong topic sentences that essentially tell your audience what that whole paragraph is about. A quote's not going to do that, right? There are some cases starting a paper with your introductory paragraph may be a little bit different, but starting and ending paragraphs with quotes means you haven't fully introduced and explained that research, okay? So if you look in the article, there is the example and then the fix, right? The examples up here and then the fix is down here. We then get into Uncle Barry and his Encyclopedia of Useless Knowledge, and this is just way too many quotes, right? Sometimes, especially in academic writing, we want to show what we know, and sometimes doing that means, like, I read this and I'm bringing this quote in, I read this and I'm bringing this quote in. We want to show that we've done that research, but it can be really overwhelming to your audience, right? Because it's just jarring to have quote after quote, because again, you're not leaving the space to introduce the quote, explain the quote, and then maybe move into your own ideas, right? And that's what each paragraph should be. It should not, the majority of the words in a paragraph should not be somebody else's words, right? It should not be a majority quotes. It should be your words, your analysis. Those quotes are only there to support your ideas, right? Because your ideas are important. So Stedman offers this example, addressing the issue, David and Potter comments, and then, we have this quote. And then we immediately go into a sentence with another quote and then another quote. And this is one of those things where it just happens sometimes when we don't realize it, because we don't want to risk plagiarism or any of those kinds of issues. And we think the original author used really great wording. That's fine, but you don't need to rely so much on somebody else's words. Rely on your own ideas and how those quotes are just helping your ideas along, okay? So avoid Uncle Barry. Am I in the right moving? And this is also one that can be kind of tricky. And this is, the quotation doesn't seem to fit considering the grammar. Okay, so, and sometimes that's hard because you have this awesome quotation and you want to use it, but you can't quite figure out how to fit it into your sentence because it's the verb tense, or the language is just kind of throwing your own sentence, and that happens, right? So here's an example. Therefore, the author warns that a zombie's vision, quote, are no different than those of a normal human. Okay, so this is a problem of verbs, right? So we have a zombie's vision, that's singular, a single zombie, are. So we need to change that verb, right? Because this is single and this is plural, okay? So it needs to read something like, therefore, the author warns that a zombie's vision is, quote, no different than those of a normal human, right? Or no different, and then in the quote, because those is plural as well. So sometimes it means changing the language outside of the quotes, right? So here's, let me find the fix that, oops. No, here. So having that a zombie's vision is, which makes the subject and verb agree, right? So here's Sheila Ann Barry advises that, quote, have you ever wondered what it's like to walk on a tightrope many feet up in the air? Whew. Okay, so this is hard because advising is not asking a question, but this is a question, right? And so this is just a simple way of Sheila Ann Barry questions if, quote, or questions that have you ever, so it's just changing the verbiage, or deciding that that quote is just not working, right? So you choose instead to paraphrase those ideas, but still give the author credit for those ideas, right? Okay, so I can't find the stupid link. Y'all, this one is really important when it comes to choice work, so please work on this if I mention this in your feedback, okay? So this is when there's no connection between the first letter of a parenthetical citation and the first letter of a works cited entry. What does that mean? I know it's, the language is a little, it throws us off, right? So this is the example in an essay. So we have, a respected guide on the subject suggests, quote, if possible, always take a high ground and hold it, end quote. So the first thing that's mentioned here is the Zombie Survival Guide. This is the title of a publication. I can tell that because it's italicized, right? But then I go to look for this publication in the works cited, and I would be scrolling down to find the Z, because we don't worry about T, Zombie Survival Guide. But it's not in the works cited, right? Because there's an author to this text, right? So in the works cited page, it's Max Brooks who cited. So this in here, needs to match this right here. That's why we use last names, not only because it shows respect for our sources, right? But those last names should match the very first thing we see in the citation for that piece, right? So if we're thinking about Choi, I'm, citing some sentence by Jennifer 8 Lee that is in Choi's work, and then I put Lee in the quotation marks. I'm not going to have Lee in the work cited for this particular publication, right? I need to make sure that people understand this is Lee's, sentence, but it's actually Choi's work, and Choi is who I need to look for in the work cited. This will probably be more apparent once I get into the ending here, but also the second video, the instructional video, okay? All right, and then I swear I did some research, and that's dropping a citation without making it clear where the information came from. So this is a really good example because the entire paragraph then ends with Hawking as a reference, right? The noted physicist Stephen Hawking, right? So our question is, well, are these all Hawking's ideas? Or is it the author's ideas, the author of the paper's ideas with Hawking's thrown in there to support, right? So here's the fix. And it's just this, right? I believe that, right? It's making sure that your audience knows, okay, I believe this, right? But then Stephen Hawking says this. One way to kind of avoid that is to kind of rely on quotes, right? Because then you have the quotation marks, you have a citation, it's very clear whose ideas those are, versus paraphrasing where it can get a little bit tricky. But sometimes you have to paraphrase so you don't overquote. So just make sure you're being mindful, okay? So I want you to make sure that you're going back and revisiting Stedman's ideas just because they're really helpful. What I do want to do is show you a little bit about those things that we want to avoid in our writing. As I was grading, I was just making some notes about some things we want to make sure that we kind of consider and avoid. So please revise these things, right? So the first is that we want to make sure we have a work cited that needs to be on its own page. The title needs to be centered, and it needs to be works cited, not bibliography, not references. It is works cited. MLA is plain and boring, right? You need to make sure your entries are alphabetized, which is usually by last names, but if there is not an author given, it's by last names and the first letter in a title. Make sure your entries are complete. I put C, Choi citation. I'm going to pull that up probably in the next video, just so that we can save some time here. Make sure that you have separate entries for all of your readings, and this is especially true for the chapters in our book. Each one of those needs a separate entry because they are considered separate kinds of publications in the way that we are using them in our research, okay? Make sure that you're indenting all paragraphs with the tab button, right? I'm hitting the tab button, and that's how it's kind of working with the bullet points. This is just one of those things where in MLA and in writing in the US, we indent all our paragraphs using the tab. Don't go in there and manually hit the space key. That throws off the spacing for your entire document. So hit the tab key, okay? Revisit the prompts just to make sure you are answering all aspects of the prompt. And then you. This was a big thing I noted in some writing. We don't want to use the word you in more formal writing. It's too conversational, right? It sounds as though you're having a conversation with your audience, but you're really not. You are presenting your ideas and wanting your audience to read it from the very beginning to the very end without stopping because of weird quotes or, MLA issues or any of that, or this notion that, you have this conversation. So what you need to do is, if you're working with Microsoft Word, hit Control F. Okay, at the top, hold on one second. At the top, if you're using a Mac, it's Command F, I'm sorry. So search for the word you, and then change it all. Okay, all right, I'm running out of time for this video, but jump on to the next video for the rest of this explanation and discussion. Okay, I'll see you there.